Okay. All right, friends, welcome to MCIC. For those who haven't been with us before, we are doing a hybrid series, and our final keynote will be next Thursday. We'll be featuring Ebony Bell from 6 to 7 p.m. in Velzy. And today, the session is College Writing Redesign, Increasing Equity, Inclusion Through Transformative Texts. We have some community standards that I will link here in the chat. These are just guidelines to help make sure that we are all participating and engaging in respectful discourse. If anybody has any questions, you're welcome to reach out. We do ask that if you would like to take any photos, screenshots, or share any content that you see today, that you request consent beforehand, just to make sure that we are honoring the experts in the room and making sure we're not reproducing content without their approval. And I just posted those in the chat. Oops, oh man, going fast. We do have live closed captioning enabled. If you do not currently see closed captioning on your screen, there should be a CC at the bottom that you can click on. It might be under the more with the dot, dot, dots, or you can click the view live transcript. All of the sessions during MCIC will be recorded. You can take out your smartphone and take a capture of this QR code if you'd like to directly connect you to the YouTube page that we have. Otherwise, you can find all the recordings for Campus Climate within the MCIC series on our YouTube page. I will also link that to the chat once we get running. If you have any questions, please feel free to engage in the chat. You can use your raise your hand feature. There's a reaction feature if you'd like to add any emojis throughout the presentation, if anything speaks to you. And we will also be monitoring the Campus Climate email if you are having any technical issues or would like to ask questions on that platform as well. All right, so to introduce our session tonight, we are here with Dr. Katie Kalish and Dr. Amanda Tucker, talking about college writing redesign, increasing equity and inclusion through transformative texts. As both national institutional data show, first-year writing courses play a pivotal role in student success and retention. This presentation examines a course redesign of College Writing 1, funded in part by the Teagle Foundation and the National Endowment for the Humanities, in order to create a more inclusive and equitable classroom environment. The redesign more greatly emphasizes the symbiotic relationship of reading and writing. Students read a diverse array of transformative texts around the broad theme of education, which worked as a springboard for them to articulate their own learning and educational goals. The presentation will also discuss how the course redesign incorporated best practices for inclusive teaching, such as maximizing student agency, utilizing low-stakes assessment, and creating opportunities for reflection and collaboration. And with that, I will hand it over to our presenters.
Awesome. Thank you, Kaden. I'm going to attempt to share our screen because Katie and I have some slides to show you and help, at least for me, keep me on track. So let me find it, and out of the approximate 35 things I have. And then there it is. Yay. I think there it is. Are you seeing this? Yep. We have the like matching background with Cadence. It looks very, I never thought about it as being matrixy, but I think it's kind of matrixy.
I love it.
I love it. So Katie and I are delighted to be here with you today. Just a little bit about me, and then I'll turn it over to Katie so she can introduce herself. I'm Amanda Tucker. I am in the English program, and then I direct the Gen Ed program. Yeah, I think that's all you need to know about me. There might be some like cats that get involved in the mix during this presentation. Fingers crossed for maybe that happens.
Hi there, I'm Katie Kalish. I also always hoped for cats, and so I'm definitely have my fingers crossed that Wendy and Bo will make an appearance. My name is Katie Kalish, like I said, excuse me, and I am a professor of English. I teach at the branch campus and also on the main campus. I'm also the director of first year writing and have been in this position for just about a year now. And so Amanda and I have been working on this grant together, and I think the relationship between these sorts of positions of gen ed director, director of first year writing, and also being English professors sort of gave us a good foundation for thinking about all of these issues.
Definitely. So this is just kind of like, so you have a sense of where we're going. I don't need to probably read these sections out to you that are on the screen, but it would be, you know, we're so excited to be here. And we want to make sure this is a beneficial use of your time. And so, you know, not all of you are teaching college writing, and we have tried to construct this presentation in a way that it's the material can be transferable to a variety of contexts. And so, you know, if you have a kind of like learning goal for the session, if there's something that you are really interested in hearing about, then I would love it if you would put that in the chat, and we will do our best to kind of work that in, either in kind of what we're talking about or in the discussion that we'll have during this. But also no pressure. If that feels like a lot to ask, then don't feel required to do that. So I'm going to start off by just telling you a little bit about this grant that Katie and I are under. So we're under a Cornerstone Learning for Living grant, and it's a joint initiative by the Teagle Foundation, which is a private foundation. It's been around for decades, and its really kind of main goal is to increase liberal arts education within higher ed. And then the National Endowment for the Humanities. And the kind of expressed goal of this Cornerstone initiative is really twofold. One, it's to move humanities from the center, to the center from the margins of undergraduate experience. As I'm looking at kind of like the people who are in here, like I don't think it's probably shocking if I say something like a lot of the focus on higher education and a lot of the prioritization in higher education has been on applied fields of knowledge rather than in like liberal arts or interdisciplinary studies. And so they really kind of like Teagle and NEH are really kind of like looking at this initiative through two different experiences. One is a gateway experience, and that's really what we're going to focus on today in our presentation. But I'll just tell you a little bit about the other, which is the pathway experience. So the gateway experience is for first year students, and it is something that is really asking students to build broad-based skills in critical reading, critical writing, and critical thinking. And one of the ways that gateway courses are constructed is that they're anchored in what Teagle calls transformative text. So reading that is really meaningful to our student population. And one of the goals is to have a kind of shared learning experience. So there is a common reading list that unites different sections of gateway courses. And the purpose of that is really to build institutional belonging and connection within the cohort. So the pathway is once you've taken a kind of like first year gateway course, then the second component of this would be to take courses in thematic clusters of general education courses. And the themes are really kind of broad and interdisciplinary, so something like the environment. And within that kind of cluster, there's an array of courses from different disciplines and fields of knowledge so that students can build an in-depth and interdisciplinary kind of like learning experience. If students choose to take a gateway course and then 3 classes in a thematic cluster, then that would culminate in them earning a certificate of integrated liberal arts. So this is really exciting for like the liberal arts, I think, but this is a DEI panel and it's a DEI presentation. So I want to think about this in terms of DEI work. Why did I all of a sudden say Helios program? Well, the way that Katie and I are doing this on our campus is that we have created the Helios program for integrated liberal arts, which is comprised of gateway courses, pathway courses, and then non-curricular experiences. 2, liberal arts at work this semester is on hiatus. When it returns, it will be under the kind of like umbrella of the Helios program. So one reason that I really what first drew me to the Cornerstone Initiative is that it's really focused on access. A lot of times when you see grants for humanities or grants on education, it's thinking about majors. And I'm really interested in everybody benefiting from humanities-based learning, regardless of their major, because they need it. I totally believe that humanities-based learning can be transformative for everybody. And so that is one of the things that's really exciting to me about this grant. The kind of thinking about the certificate more specifically, I think there's really a need on our campus to be able to provide an inclusive academic identity for students. We organize academics around majors. And here's and that makes total sense. But it also, I think, leaves some students feeling marginalized and vulnerable. And so I want to talk about a couple demographics of students that I feel like are sometimes left out of conversations when we organize everything by major. And when I say everything, I mean like how we're recruiting to prospective students, to, of course, our current students as well. One is that we have an increasing number of students who come in with an undecided major. I believe that was the 3rd most popular major for our fall 2021 class. And so what do we communicate to them when we organize everything around majors? You're behind. You haven't done what you're supposed to do yet by choosing what you want to do for the rest of your life when you're 18 years old. Doesn't that sound insane to you? It sounds insane to me. We already have populations of students that are grappling with imposter syndrome. This doesn't help. And then finally, we're a STEM-oriented institution. What I can say about national trends and also from institutional data is that a lot of our students who enter in as STEM majors shift to other fields. And kind of anecdotally, what I can tell you is that as somebody who teaches a lot of first-year students, there is a lot of anxiety and sadness and just negative emotions overall with the switching of majors, that they have let their parents down, that they have wasted time, that they have wasted opportunity. What this can do, what the certificate can do is, one, it's not a huge ask. It's not 80 credits. And it can provide a point of stability for academic identity as students are shifting or as they're making more informed decisions about what they want their major to be. The other thing Katie and I really wanted to do through this program is remove barriers for participation. So access is really, really important to us. And so one of the things to note about the certificate is that it doesn't add time to degree. It doesn't add credits. It's something that you can complete while fulfilling general education requirements. And the way that we've particularly are trying to construct both the gateway and the pathway is that so students have agency and options. They can choose the kind of classes that they want to take. They can choose the themes that they're interested in. And we've also kind of tried to have an array of options for them so that things that like logistical things like work schedules, you can work around and still complete the certificate. So that's a little bit about the initiative and then how we're carrying that out on campus. And I am going to turn to my colleague Katie to talk about the course that we redesigned for that. Do you want me to just keep my screen on and just go to the next thing?
I would love if you would do that. That would be
cool. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Amanda. Excuse me. So like Amanda mentioned, we have our students taking a gateway class as a way to move into the certificate. And we thought that 1130 was a great fit because it is sort of addressing these important foundational skills that our students need. Also, about 75% of our students take English 1130. And so we thought that that would make it a good class to start with. English 1130 is a course that focuses maybe in a more of an introductory way on academic reading, writing, and critical thinking. And so as director of first year writing, one of the things that I was sort of keeping in mind was, students need to have this experience where they're doing academic reading, writing, and thinking in a way that's going to prepare them for 1230 and also prepare them, excuse me, for their academic classes in general. And so one thing that I had in the back of my mind is that, you know, this class, it is different. It's housed in the English department, but it is different than a humanities class. And so if we just said we're only teaching humanities classes and we're going to do literary analysis of all of these transformative texts, that would not have worked for the program. And so we needed to be really thoughtful about the way that we designed the class to ensure that students were engaging in reading those transformative texts, but that was in conjunction with other texts and many different types of texts. And so I found that the class ended up, I think, working really well. There are two sort of main focuses that we had when we were revising. And the first was in terms of the course readings. And so the goal for gateway classes is that 50% of the course content comes from the list of transformative texts. And so we changed the readings on the syllabus, and we included a lot of humanities-based texts, and I think that they enhanced the course in some really interesting ways. The NACA Native American Educational Philosophy text was actually not on our transformative text list, but it's an example of a text that we added that was more of like a policy statement or an educational philosophy. And it worked really well in conjunction with some of these more narrative-based texts that we used, like Linda Berry's The Sanctuary of School, or the Adichie's The Danger of a Single Story. And so we met the course goals, I think, by including lots of different types of texts. And so it wasn't entirely focused on just, you know, stories from the humanities. And I would say too that it's important to keep in mind that our list of transformative texts includes texts that are more like philosophical based texts. So it's not just all narrative. The Linda Berry piece was an editorial that used a lot of narrative components that we saw connecting it to the humanities. One of the things that I think made this really exciting and really inclusive was the way that those texts brought in lots of different voices. And so I'm on our local school board, and we've actually been talking a lot with community members about our curriculum, and there are a lot of concerns that people are bringing up in terms of critical race theory. That's the umbrella that people are using to talk about it. And that's not, I mean, we're not teaching second graders critical race theory, but as I was responding as a board member to some of those concerns, I was doing a little bit of research, and I came across a really amazing metaphor in Christ and Sharma's article. And basically what they did was they talked about how texts can provide windows and they can provide mirrors. And so one of the things that was in my mind as we were coming up with our list of transformative texts was, are we going to have texts where students are going to see themselves reflected back? Or will there be mirrors? And that's so important. And so I think of The Sanctuary of School as a text where Linda Berry writes about her experiences in a home that maybe didn't feel stable, or maybe was economically disadvantaged as her district was. And in some ways, I think that could provide mirrors for our students, many of whom are in similar positions in their own lives. And then we had other texts that I think provided windows so that students, windows, right? So that students can read this text and think, wow, this person's experience is different than mine. And it's interesting for them to see and understand other people and see a variety of experiences and perspectives that are represented through those texts. And so I think that was a really important function of the list of transformative texts. I will say that part of the reason that I put the NACA Native American Educational Philosophy up is because I teach on the Baraboo campus, and we have a pretty significant number of Native American students, Ho-Chunk students, that come to our campus. And one student was like emotional in class, and he said, "This is Native American philosophy. I'm Native American." And he saw himself reflected in that text in a way that was really deeply meaningful. The other thing that we did was we revised our assignments. And so I just want to give a quick overview of what we did with that. In part because I want to make it really clear that this isn't this isn't solely a humanities class. This isn't, we're not reading like 5 Dickens novels and then writing a bunch of literary analysis papers. So the first assignment that we redesigned was a literacy narrative focusing on self-assessment. And I'll talk about this assignment a little bit more extensively in a later slide. But the literacy narrative focusing on self-assessment is really important in terms of inclusive pedagogy, because what it's doing is it's helping our students do 2 things. One is that they're engaging in self-assessment. So they're having this metacognitive moment where they're thinking about their skills. But 2, they're putting their voices in context with all of these readings. And so they're able to say, here are all of these people who had these different experiences with education, and this is what my experience is. And so they're situating their own voice in the writing of all of these other people. And I think that creates a sense of belonging that is especially really important in a first-year writing class. We also had students do an analysis synthesis essay in which they more formally situated their voice in the context of other voices that may have included, maybe not just narratives, but many different types of texts. Our third major assignment was an education and citizenship report and group presentation. And this was a collaborative group project. And I think this was really fun and exciting to see our students engaging in this collaborative group work. I think I can speak for my class. I think Amanda probably saw this as well, that there was really a sense of belonging, and our students were able to talk about collaboration and working with people who may have different perspectives. And then the last thing that we did was we did have a set of admission tickets. And so this was a lower stakes assignment, and we realized maybe too many of them. But what this did was it allowed them to just practice their critical reading skills. And so they had a way to get some low stakes feedback on those assignments. Let me just look at my notes quick and see if there's anything else that I wanted to add. Yeah, I think that's good. I'll touch base on some of these things a little bit more when we talk about reflection and collaboration.
Okay, so I'm going to take over for Katie for the next little bit, just to talk about kind of a broader concept or theme that we wanted to bring into the class. And that's asset-based pedagogy. And I want to first kind of talk a little bit about what that is, based in some ways on comparison to other common models of education, and then give you a couple examples of how we did this in the class. And my hope is that we can think about how these different maybe strategies for using asset-based pedagogy can transfer to other contexts. So when we think about models of education, one of the most common that people talk about is the banking model of education, which was popularized by Frere. I see Frank nodding. Yep. This idea that like students are like teachers just deposit their knowledge and information into students. And so I would kind of highlight a couple things about that. One, students in this kind of like weird banking metaphor are like passive receptacles, right? Like they're not people. They're almost like automatons, and they're not being asked to actively engage. It doesn't acknowledge their lived experience. It doesn't kind of give them any room for agency. Another really kind of like model that we see a lot is a deficit model of education. Why do I have this in red? Because I think one real quick good example of this is the kind of cliche of getting a paper back in a writing class that's like dripping with red ink, almost like blood, right? And like, oh no, somebody has circled all the things that you're doing wrong. I think that a deficit model of education is probably the most common way that students are taught writing before they come into our classes. So things like, I'm going to count off 5 points every time that you make a punctuation error or something like that. The focus is really on identifying and correcting problems. And kind of in terms of DEI, one of the things that happens with a deficit model of education is it often places students from historically marginalized groups at a disadvantage. How does that work? Let me give a quick example. One of my friends in grad school, during a conversation, we were talking about our undergraduate experiences. She's Cuban American. She had gone to the Northeast for her undergraduate experience. And there was a pattern of instructors calling her into their office and saying, anywhere from directly accusing her of plagiarism to saying she got too much help, to something like that, because she spoke Cuban accented English. So obviously she should not be so strong within this discipline. In other words, like somebody who has fluency in multiple languages, that's not looked upon as a positive, it's looked upon as a deficit, like, and even kind of like places a ceiling in terms of what she can accomplish. And I'll just remind you, she's getting a PhD in English. She was on a like super prestigious fellowship. She's awesome. But like that was never, like, the assumption was that it was not possible for her to do this work. When we look at asset-based model of education, the focus is on strengths. So another way this is talked about is strength-based approaches. It's looking at what is the potential that we see and how can we help students reach that potential. It is very much connected to cultural responsiveness and relevancy. One of the things that we thought about our particular context and cultural responsiveness is kind of the ways in which students see themselves as writers. So we can give lots of anecdotal experience. One of the things that Katie and I have talked about is that a lot of our students are coming into college writing with almost trauma. The things that past language arts teachers have said to them are really like beyond the like, I mean, like awful, like things like you will never be successful in college. Like humiliating students in front of their peer, like really terrible things. And so kind of for one of the things I think for us in thinking about an asset-based model of education is, one, to acknowledge that experience that a lot of our students are coming in with. By the way, it's not just anecdotal. That when we look at national research, students tend to have the most fixed mindset and most negative mindset about their abilities in terms of math and writing. So it is kind of like something that has been studied outside the one particular classroom or one particular institution. So we knew that we wanted to address that students were coming in with lived experiences, often in the classroom, in terms of their writing, that were often not positive. And so kind of when we thought about how we wanted to work within this context, I could talk about a lot of things, but I just chose three that I hope are fairly transferable. So one thing that we wanted to do is mindset intervention. I have David Yeager mentioned here. He's at UT Austin. He's a developmental psychologist. And one of the cool things that he has done is an intervention for incoming students at UT Austin. He's at the University of Texas at Austin. And the intervention was really brief. It was like a couple-minute video that incoming students saw. And it was students who looked like them, who said, I'm a student at UT Austin. I really like being a student at UT Austin. I had a really hard time when I first came here. Here's a challenge that I had, and here's how I overcame that challenge. And what kind of that study found was that students who, such a small thing, so like a couple-minute video, it had a huge effect, particularly for students who were coming from underrepresented groups in terms of retention and even graduation. Even though it was incoming students, it was like a very small time commitment. It had a huge kind of like effect. And we wanted to see about doing something similar in this class for mindset intervention. And so when we were picking some of the transformative text that Katie was talking about, we really wanted to focus on narratives that talked about challenges with writing and with reading, and how kind of people had overcome these challenges. So one kind of example that's a really powerful narrative is from Autobiography of Malcolm X. It's excerpted as Learning to Read. And it was something that kind of, here's this amazing kind of not only historical figure, but writer, right? Talking about how he kind of like essentially taught himself how to write and read by copying the dictionary in prison. Like it's an amazing piece. And our hope with that is that, as Katie was talking about, students could place their own voices and their own experiences in a context with other people, and also see, in order to create belonging, and then also hear stories of resilience that could also help to bolster their own resilience. The first essay that Katie talked about is a literacy narrative that asks them to, in some ways, create a counter story, which I know is a really kind of popular concept right now. I think coming from literary studies, it's something that we've been thinking about for decades in terms of how stories are told and what stories are canonical and which ones aren't. Unfortunately, one of the kind of like popular stories that students in college writing tell themselves is that they are bad writers. And what we essentially asked them to do kind of covertly in this class was to write an essay that talked about their strengths as a writer, and to look at their kind of like lived experiences and how those helped them to develop strengths in terms of literacy. So we kind of asked them to read this piece, and we can link it in the chat. Framework for Success in Post-Secondary Writing, that identified certain habits of mind like curiosity, openness, responsibility. And we said, okay, you have developed these traits. How have you developed these traits to this point? And so we've gotten a lot of really interesting papers about how like being super involved in a sport, right, has helped them to build skills that are essential for literacy, or something like that. And I think that's been really powerful, is to in asking them to reframe their past experiences as being valuable to them and helping them set them up for success in college and in writing. And then finally, thinking about the kind of feedback that we give students. So, one thing kind of and I think really making sure that you're communicating this clearly with students is important, because one perception that students often has is if you have comments on anything, the comments are pointing out all your problems because they're coming from a deficit-based model of education. So being able to write comments like highlight a sentence and be like, this is an amazing use of description, and this is exactly how you engage the reader, is really important and powerful to point out things that they're doing really well. Of course, you still need to point out areas for improvement, but again, how you frame that, I think, is really important. You can say, I don't understand what this means. This is unclear. Or just a series of question marks. Or you could say, this idea is really compelling. There's a lot of potential in this idea. I'd love to see you develop this further, right? And both of them are pointing out something to do, but one of them is making them feel really positive about what they've already done, where the other one is not. It's kind of pointing out like, what are the things that you're doing wrong? So one of the things I wonder, maybe I'll kind of like save this for our conversation later, and just ask you maybe to reflect on this a little bit, and we'll have it for Q&A. But how I wonder if these are concepts that might translate to the spaces that you occupy, like in a professional setting or in a classroom or wherever, right? But like, how might providing asset-based feedback using counter stories or mindset intervention be something that could be utilized in the spaces that you occupy? So I'll just kind of let that linger as a question for you to think about or put in the back of your mind, and we'll save it for discussion at the end. And I will turn things back over to my partner in crime, Katie. So there
Thanks,
we go.
Amanda. So two of the things that we thought of that really connected with inclusive practices that we wanted to talk about were, and that also are a really important part of this class, are reflection and collaboration. And so reflection is something that we built into the class throughout the class in many different types of ways. And so, there are definitely opportunities through formal assessments. And so the self-reflection paper, the narrative self-reflection, that's a formal assessment. That's a formal paper. They take it through peer review, they revise it, they get feedback on it. It's worth a lot of points. And in it, they're reflecting on their strengths as writers and thinking about how their background has helped prepare them for academic reading, writing, and critical thinking. But we also have opportunities for reflection within discussions and informal writing exercises so that students can think about their own learning. One of the things that I think is really valuable about that and really important is that we do have those low stakes writing assignments. And so one of the things that we know from research on student writing is that having opportunity for low stakes writing exercises actually helps students become better writers. They're more likely to take risks. They're more likely to explore their ideas when they know that they aren't going to be judged for them. And that's also practice that they're getting as writers. That's really important. I think that having reflections, especially with like a narrative self-reflection essay, reinforces the value in their own experiences and their own perspectives. And so it's an opportunity for them to actually write down what they think about something. In my classes, one of the things that I like to do when I have a question that I want us to discuss is I like to give them time for reflection, and I like to have them free write. So just jot down their ideas and what comes to mind. And I think one of the things that's really important about that, excuse me, is that it really encourages discussion. And so students, when they have something that's written down on a piece of paper in front of them, they're more comfortable sharing their ideas. And then what that does for us as a class is it demonstrates that there isn't always one answer, and that there's not just sort of like one authority, right, that comes up with the answer, and that they can provide answers and that their voices are valuable. It makes students more comfortable speaking. And it also, I think, in a really important way, especially when linked with ideas about metacognition, it gives students an opportunity to identify confusion and to be able to say, you know, here's something that I had a question about, especially if we build that into our reflection questions, to be able to say, you know, this is something I wasn't sure about, or I needed to know more, or I was a little bit confused about this. And that's normalizing the learning process, right? We don't all, you know, we're not banking method and we're not pouring knowledge into students' brains. But in fact, reflection allows them to think about, you know, to have that metacognitive moment where they think about what they know and what they still need to learn. And so those reflective practices are ingrained throughout the class. It also asks them to situate their own literacy in the context of other course texts. And that's really important, because what that's doing is it's really elevating their voices to say, here are how these different people are talking about their experiences as learners. And this is my experience as a learner, and I'm writing it down. And inherently there's value in that. And then especially when they're getting feedback that is asset-based, that's really reinforcing those messages in important ways. So the entire class isn't reflection though. And so because it's English 1130, one of the things that's really important for that course is that students are engaging in lots of different types of reading. So they're reading many different types of texts. And so they're reading a lot of these humanities-based texts, but they're also reading reports, they're reading scholarly journal articles, they're reading policy statements, they're engaging with lots of different types of readings. They're also doing a lot of different types of writing. And that's really important, because one of the goals for a class like English 1130 is that our students come out of it being flexible and adaptable writers, so that they can say, you know, I know how to do a piece of writing that focuses on telling a story about myself, and I know how to do a piece of writing that asks me to analyze something or synthesize something or write a report, and adapt those different pieces of writing. We ended our class with a major assignment that was a collaborative group project. And in that, what we were doing is we're asking our students to make a recommendation about how the UW-Platteville campus or campuses could improve citizenship education. And so they thought about the variety of course texts that they had read. And we had some specific Platteville texts and data that could help them make that argument. And so there were some things that were really important about this collaborative group work. One of the things is that it was creating a sense of belonging for all the students in the classroom. And so those students were part of a group, and the work that they were doing was with people that they, by and large, they worked really well with. And so that was important. One of the things that was really important too, in that sense of creating a sense of belonging, was asking students really explicitly to think about their role within the group. And so Amanda actually had this great resource that came up with a set of guidelines for like best practices in working collaboratively. And that was a great starting point for that conversation. So it could say, hey, you're working as part of a group, you're collaborating, and here's some of the responsibilities that you have as a collaborative group member. And then from there, we could ask our students explicitly to discuss their roles within the group and how they would balance the workload, what they were going to take on, how they were going to manage it. So we were giving them guided ways to sort of navigate their communication within people in the group. So that I thought was really purposeful. It also, one of the things that I really liked about it as an instructor was that it also allowed me to give increased attention to the groups. And so, you know, if I'm working with a class of 24 students and they all have a paper, if I wanted to talk to everybody about their thesis statement, it would take a really long time. But because they were working in groups, I could consult with each group. And that allowed me to give more attention to each of those groups. And I think that sort of relationship building from student to student is really important, but also from professor to student is really critical. And so we were able to do that. It allowed them to sort of practice different academic moves of working with other people. And so one of the things that Amanda and I sort of talked about quite a bit was the AAC&U employer survey. And it talks about what employers are looking for. And one thing that they really value is that that people who graduate from college who come and work for them are able to communicate with people from different cultural backgrounds. And one of the things that they could practice in their groups was engaging in these moves of sharing ideas or perspective taking or questioning each other or planning or problem solving. And so that they had the ability to work with people who maybe had different ideas or coming from different backgrounds and could share ideas and negotiate things in different ways. And so I would say it was, you know, it's interesting to focus on these two. There are so many different things that they got out of the classes, but these two really, I think, connected to ideas of inclusion.
I think what I'm going to do now is just stop sharing so we can like look at people's faces. It's always delightful. And I wonder if we can maybe talk about what are questions that you have, you know, which we're happy to answer, but also can we have a discussion? Are there ways that kind of like our experience, which is still unfolding, I will say, like we're piloting this. I tend to think teaching is just a lifelong journey anyway. So we don't have all the answers, but we're happy to answer kind of questions to the best of our ability. And also maybe can we just have a discussion about, are there things in here that resonated with you or that might work for you in different contexts? We'll just open the floor up for conversation.
So I have one question. How can these types of practices be done more at just changing the overall culture of the institution? What can we do to ensure that this is something that is much larger instead of, you know, what your grant is doing, but just something that is going to be included as a part of just UW-Platteville?
That's a great question. And I wonder too, like, I think it's so great that you talked about the culture of the university, which doesn't just exist in classes, right? And in some ways, I think the entire kind of like culture of higher education is fairly deficit based, right? I mean, think like when you get back an article that you sent out for peer review, right? Like, it's like, here's all the things that you're doing wrong. And most of it is because you haven't talked enough about me. Like, it's like not, so I think it's a heavy lift, but I think it's really worth doing. I guess I would say, I think there's ways that that's happening. I love the kind of like Teaching and Technology Center is doing the inclusive pedagogy stuff. I feel like one thing that has come out of COVID is really helping us in our kind of various, sometimes isolated places to remind ourselves that like what we all have in common is that we want to help students be successful. We can use that as a starting point. I think that there needs to be concerted effort to how to like build on like DEI work kind of like as part of our kind of like not just as like lip service, right? But like stuff that we do, like that we actively do. And yeah, Katie.
I'll add, one thing. So yesterday I talked to the folks in criminal justice, in the criminal justice department. They had wanted information about giving feedback on student writing. And so I love that they asked about that. And I did use that opportunity to talk about like giving clear and specific feedback about what students do well and the importance of that and the value of that. We also talked a lot about dialect, right? And about how students are coming to these classes with a variety of dialect, whether, the examples that I used were like he be going home, which was coming from a Hankerson article that used that example from African American English. And then there's a Mark Blau-Hara used an example in one of his texts that I pulled out that I liked a lot, which was, I seen a lot of deers in the wood last week. And so sort of bringing up the idea that there are a lot of different dialects that our writers are using, and that, students should have a right to their own language, and that, when we're focusing on issues, of grammar or punctuation that are actually connected to dialect, that's an inappropriate way of teaching. And that there's a more inclusive way of approaching writing than focusing solely on issues like that. So we talked about that. And so I think that that was, I think one of the things, and maybe part of this is something that I can think about in my role of director of first year writing, but I think one of the things that happens is that writing is key, right? Like people write to learn, and people across many different disciplines are assigning writing projects, but maybe don't necessarily have training or feedback in how to, or, training in how to offer feedback on that writing. And I'm like Amanda mentioned, we were talking about like the trauma that our students had about the feedback that they've gotten on writing. I'm teaching a class for students who are going to become teachers, and I'm teaching that this semester. And a lot of my students are talking about like the really cruel things that were said, or the things that were said that really like made them not want to engage in that sort of work. And so I think, one piece of how we can fix that is I can take some of that on and need to work on some of that in reaching out to say, here are some ways that we can offer feedback in writing in ways that are positive and that encourage students and help them grow and help them learn and help them become better.
I apologize if this is kind of part of Frank's question, but I'm wondering if you all have had any crossover with other like first year experience classes or like the intro to college classes, because I feel like some of the feedback that I've gotten from students is a lot of the bulk of the content of those classes is focusing on how to navigate PASS or Canvas or these things, but those are often things that they already know going into the university. Like even first year or first generation students are having to learn those things before they even land on campus to sign up for various stuff or do intro work. So I'm just curious, like I think this, I love the strategies that you two have utilized, and it just sounds like that's something that students could really benefit from in other spaces too.
Yeah, I can talk about this just in my capacity as Gen Ed director. And so I think one of the things that I've been collaborating with academic affairs and academic support programs and then Gen Ed committee really for years is I don't know, like it is maybe rethinking how we consider what the first year experience is. Because right now we're really just like, let's have a 1 credit class and throw everything in there. And I think maybe like we can consider the first year a little bit more holistically. And so I know kind of like one of our goals is Yeah, what are the resources? And wouldn't it be great? This is maybe getting at some of what Frank was talking about too. Wouldn't it be great if we had like a just a Canvas site for all students about things like what are the strategies that they need to be successful for note taking? What are the kind of like study strategies that are best utilized for exams? Because like there are best practices for those things. And unfortunately, for things like studying for exams, the things that are not only most commonly used by students, but most commonly advocated for by teachers are both the least efficient and the least successful. So, like, I just think like providing learning resources for students at the university level would be really beneficial. And that's one of the things that I would like to do as Gen Ed director is have kind of like that available to all students. But I think, Hayden, one of the things that you're pointing out that doesn't address and that is really needed is the more like affective component of the like more emotional, like psychological component of being a college student, which I think is like a lot we sometimes don't really acknowledge. So yeah, I hope that we can have a wider kind of audience and really just help again, because we all want to help students be successful. So what can we do to help make them successful outside of the confines of one particular class?
And I'll just chime in because I taught 3 sections of UW study last semester because our campus was struggling to find somebody to take them on. And Steve, who had to arrange it, his office is next to mine, and I just, would do anything for Steve. So I said, yes, I will take these 3 sections. And I think one of the things about the UW study class is that there is a lot that needs to be accomplished in that class. And so it's pretty prescriptive in terms of like, here are the things that you need to read, here are the things that you need to talk about. So that agenda is pretty full. And it also only meets once a week because it's a 1-credit class. And so I will say one of the things that I think is really special about first year writing is that I think in most cases, those are classes where there is a really strong sense of community. And I think, folks who teach writing have the experience of teaching. It's really hard to talk about reading and writing. Like, it's really hard for students to talk about writing. They're sharing their ideas. You're like taking your brain and you're putting it on paper for people to see, and they're going to evaluate it and tell you whether you're good enough or not. And when that happens, in terms of like peer review or informal writing activities, it's really important for us in first year writing classes that we establish a sense of community and that we like get along with each other and like each other and get to know each other, because all of that really contributes to a sense of openness. And so I think, and I think that happens in a lot of first year classes, but I think because of the sort of, the word that comes to mind is like the intimate nature of writing, right? Sharing your mind with other people. I think that, that sort of, I think that there's a lot to be done of sense of, yeah, exactly. So Caden just said in the comment, and such a great way for folks to practice vulnerability in a safe environment. Yes, that's exactly what we need to do, is sort of create that safe environment. And then students, I feel like they develop friendships and they bond, and it's really important. It's important for retention. I mean, and I like retention is such a administrative way of thinking of it, but like, persistence, right?
Well, and I think
Learning
that's like,
involves failure, right? Like learning involves failure, life involves failure. We have to allow people to fail. Like that's how we get better. So yeah.
yeah. And there's such a rich body of research out there now showing how important a sense of belonging is for retention across universities and employment, right? And so I think the way that you two are cultivating that in this, in this class and with this grant, I think is so cool. And it would be so awesome to find ways to elevate that and transfer it to other parts, because yeah, it's connecting with other bodies of literature that we know are leading to successful outcomes, and you're already incorporating those things.
Just as a side note, because I think it's kind of funny, one of my students' favorite things that I do in the semester is I show them a draft with feedback from a peer reviewer for a project that I worked on with like 4 other English professors. And I just scroll through and they just see so much red. And I say, this is people whose expertise is teaching writing, and they're writing about that, and they all have PhDs, and look at all the things we have to do and change. And it's really sort of delightful and eye-opening for them to see that this is something that is happening at all levels, right? That it's not just first year students who get and need to use feedback, but that we're all using feedback and that we're all working to improve our writing and our skills.
I just wanted to jump in and say, I think the way that you're going about this is going to be really beneficial for students on the autism spectrum and create a lot more access, because we know that folks on the spectrum can struggle with theory of mind, which makes it difficult to write. So having the other students actually share essentially what's going on in their brain or where, you know, where they're at can really help them improve on that. So I think this is awesome.
That's super helpful. Thank you. And also some of my research is in cognitive literary studies and theory of mind. So I would love to connect with you later to talk about that.
Awesome.
Well,
Any other questions? Oh, sorry, Amanda.
I was just going to say, I know we want to be like respectful of your time and just kind of like if anybody's interested in any of this and wants to talk about to it about Katie and I, please like reach out, email or phone or whatever, and we're happy to talk more.
Awesome. Yeah, this was super interesting. I super appreciate you two being here and learning about your work, and definitely, yeah, I'm definitely taking some things to consider even, and yeah, some of the things that I do within presentations and stuff. So I appreciate it so much. Yeah, so I'm gonna go ahead and end the recording, but if folks want to stick around and have any questions, I'm able to hang out a little bit longer.